An increase in the effective minimum wage will have less of an impact on employment if the demand for labor is blank. So in this case, we're told that there's an increase in the effective minimum wage, and we're asked, well, this will have less of an impact on employment if the demand for labor is derived demand, decreasing, relatively elastic, relatively inelastic, or unit elastic. So to answer this, we have to consider what will happen if demand is inelastic, uninelastic, or elastic. And to answer this, we could use a graph. So this graph will show supply and demand curve. This supply and demand curve will be for wages by quantity. And let's assume that demand for labor is a sort of unit elastic curve. So if we set a price control that sets the price for labor up here, which is essentially a minimum wage, let's call this the minimum wage, then this has this much of an impact on unemployment, where this many people want to work, but they aren't able to be offered a job. Now let's consider this is the situation where it's unit elastic. Let's see what happens if we were to draw an elastic graph and then a inelastic graph. So this would be the same thing, wages by quantity, and this would be a more elastic graph. So an elastic graph is more flatter or smoother, and then the supply curve is still the same. Let's draw this demand curve a bit more flatter. Now in this case, if we set a minimum wage up here, we can see that there's a much bigger amount of people who want to work, but they aren't able to, because this supply and demand, dictates how many people want to work, and at this point, this is how many people will be hired, but this is how many people are willing and able to work. So in this case, elastic makes a bigger effect on employment if demand for labor is elastic. Now let's consider what would happen if demand for labor is inelastic. In this case, the graph would look the same, wage by quantity, supply would still be this, and demand in this case would be steeper, much more steeper, and it would look something like this. Now, if we were to draw a minimum wage up here, we can see that this has much less of an impact compared to these two, because in this case, there's fewer people who are willing and able to work, and more of these people are hired, because demand for labor is inelastic, meaning that if there's an increase in the minimum wage, this will have less of an impact on employment if demand for labor is inelastic. So if we were to look at the answer choices, we can see that this matches answer choice D. And we can tell that A, derived demand, is incorrect, because derived demand is simply the demand for labor dictated by the product, but this wouldn't make sense in this case. Neither would decreasing, because you don't describe demand for labor as decreasing. So then among C, D, and E, we saw that elastic made it worse, unit elastic wasn't as good as inelastic, and inelastic was the best among the three. Therefore, D is the correct answer.